After 3 hours of sitting in some hopeless prol's pitch-black kitchen, James stepped over to the window and gently clawed the glass. "Is it safe?" I asked. "Forget safe, kid. You'll never know the meaning of it," James grumbled. "I feel alright now." "Well, you're wrong, shit for brains," James insisted, pointing at me. He wasn't this stressed when he came to get me a few hours before. I finally got it through my head that the invasion was actually about to happen. But I was safer with him than anyone else that night, so I didn't think of home. James quickly regained his composure and returned his hand to the glass. Clink. I couldn't tell how this grass-scratching ritual was going to keep me alive, but this guy came with recommendations worthy of his price, so I sat back and felt safe in my little brain of shit. "They're nearly here. What are you going to say when they ask who you are?" James quizzed me. I'm the shit on your dog's third boot." "What the fuck? You're from this planet, right?" "Yeah." "What? Talk like they do." "Oh right, you never met a single fucking person on this planet, have you?" "I've met plenty." "Well, check out their dogs next time. Poor dogs don't wear shoes. Actually, dogs can't breathe the air outside the palace, so there are none." James wasn't happy about this, I believe. "Yeah. Tell him you grew up on Vega, raised by dogs, and you'll seem a lot less like a ticket to riches and fame for anyone with the good sense to sell you to the spacers. Hell, you even look like you were raised by dogs." "I'm not taking it off," I reminded him. James didn't like my fur coat. There was a faint twinkling sound. It was the glass quivering against James's pointed steel nails. "They're here," James said. His voice had suddenly gone distant, and my stomach did the same. Soon enough, the vibrations were rattling things all around us. Then they stopped for a good 30 seconds. James had a black metal palm pointing at me with statuesque poise. A red light flashed by the window. A piercing whoosh battered the glass, then everything shuddered alongside a thunderous sound some distance away. It was the first beat in an alien rhythm. "Is everything okay?" I said, immediately regretting it. "That was a good one," James said, probably not to me. He pushed away from the window. There were cannons firing close by, so quickly it was like a fizzling, a gargling of the old devil. Something exploded on the roof of the building. James and I looked at the ceiling nonchalantly, assessing our chances through experience and ignorance respectively. "We'll blend in among the rest. You know the drill," James said. I confessed I didn't. "Ain't this your drill? NEP fucking regulation suicide vest?" As he said this, he tore the kitchen door open and took me to the exit, where 4 yellow coats were hanging up on high hooks, marked with red and white fluorescent tape. I got his meaning. I had once been made to take a picture in one of these coats for an old colonial brochure. I was 7 years old, and getting shot for wearing the wrong coloured jacket wasn't something I thought about as I smiled for the palace press corps. For the people of Solo Nobre, on the other hand, it was only natural that life and death were just 2 shades of citrus. Innocent people wear yellow. I pulled it on over my furs as easily as any other lie. James said something to me, but the sounds of fighting drowned it out. I called for him to repeat himself. Ignoring me, he smashed the front door down and span his yellow coat up over his shoulders. I pulled mine tight and took in the smell of fire from outside. Whatever James had said, I figured I should follow him out when he bolted, so I started running. The red streaks of glowing munitions lit up the night sky and raced here and there above us like birds. We crossed the street and got closer to a crowd of proles trying to get through a checkpoint into the park. James examined the pulsating blur of yellow coats and tapped the steel plate that covered his eyes. "Nope," he concluded, turning me back and dragging me along the road towards the main street at the other end. I could hardly keep my eyes open because of all the shockwaves flying around. The building we'd been in a minute earlier was in flames, and another one was in the process of tumbling to the ground around the oversized tank that had just smashed through it. The tank's turret rotated towards us. I'm in a yellow coat, right? There was a horn that sounded behind us. An NEP Walker mech had come to manage the checkpoint. A praetor, James said. I didn't look, but I know what happened. A single belch from the tank sent a shell down the road in a split second. I felt, for the shortest moment, the heat of it passing over my head. There was a blast that split the walker's body from its legs, and both crumbled over into the crowd. Hard to say if the explosion killed them before the crushing weight of the metal did. This war started quickly. It was just what we always said the syndicalists would do, those rebels against the NEP. My father said they would get their way in the city one day because we civilized people would fix all their problems for them. We should have killed them already. James dragged me down an alley, pushing past a group of yellowcoats going the other way. I heard their horrified screams behind us and the tank growling past with its machine gun drumming anything that moved. "They're ignoring the coats. The syndicalists are killing everyone," I protested to James as if he could do something about it. He smiled at me. "Not just syndicalists, kid. Today's a new war. That's why we're leaving. Keep up." James led me through narrow passageways behind the shops and apartment buildings to get to the main street. The way we came was a pile of rubble with a tank sticking out when I chanced to look back. It was firing at something on the next street over, across the rail tracks, and a thick smoke was rolling down from above, like a curtain falling over a stage. At the main street, proles were huddled between the barriers in the middle of the road, waving flashlights in the air and even brandishing yellow sheets on sticks. Some people were in the windows of buildings around the street, begging for those outside to come back in. 3 bikes came screaming up the road, then skidded around to face the way they'd come. Under the flickering lights at the distant end, 2 small walkers smashed through a fence. They were Mogs, special police, my father called them. I ran towards the yellowcoats to join them before we got caught in the open. "Don't!" James reprimanded me, almost picking me up off the ground with a pinch of my shoulder. I cried in pain, then crawled after him. I stumbled back to my feet when the Mogs started machine gunning the road. The bikers let out cannon blasts. These were rebel bikes, covered in greasy guns. There was whooshing and whizzing everywhere. The cries of the people at the barriers were too quiet to get through all that. I saw some of them die when the big bullets from those machine guns tore through lines of them all at once, and when the streetlights exploded into fountains of metal shards. By then, James was lying on top of me on the floor. There was a rasping sound, louder than anything I had ever heard, and then some of the buildings were fragmented into so many pieces that they were like a liquid that crashed down in a wave over the road. Yellowcoats and all disappeared under the black mess of oilcrete. I didn't do much of anything until James picked me back up. The people still alive were scattering. The bikes were on their sides and leaking smoke. I couldn't see the Mogs behind all the unsettled rubble. "What's going on?" I begged James. He ignored me and pushed through the yellowcoats to look at the bikes. Another bomb from above struck close by, and I thought James was killed. Everyone around him was in pieces, but he was still prodding at the fallen bike like nothing had happened, his yellow coat almost torn clean off. Everyone was shouting that the safety coats didn't work. I kept mine on anyway and scrambled over to James. He had uprighted the bike and was prying a dismembered hand from the controls at the rear. "We've got a meeting to attend," James said, dragging me onto the single-person seat. "Everyone's killing everyone, destroying the city," I mumbled in a half-sane daze. "Money speaks, money gets," James quipped with a growl. He had the bike rumbling forward, balanced on the back of my seat like a stuntman. I just closed my eyes and hung on to the handles. Everything sounded quieter. My heart wasn't supposed to beat so fast, I was sure of that. I opened my eyes when James dragged me off. I didn't even realize we'd stopped. We were in the park. Trees, yellowcoats milling around safely. Occasionally something fell and blew up. The park. "Fuck. That's her. Fuck," James haikued. He was looking, pointing his faceplate, towards a group standing way out in the open beside a load of handcarts of scrap. There were bodies on the floor between them and us. James was already going over, and so was I. He ran, I walked. The coats were supposed to be worn while walking. That's the sign of innocence. Did no one even read that brochure? The guys we were approaching didn't have coats, and sure enough, they weren't innocents. One held a yellow scarf above his head, as if a mech would even notice it and hold fire. Not that the guys attacking could afford to hold fire anyway, but I guess of all of us, only James knew that for sure that night. The leader of the group was a woman with oil smeared on her face, who I still recognized instantly, Nabo. She'd been in that brochure too, because she was the prettiest thing in the NEP. Even half blown up and wearing a pilot suit 10 sizes too big, she still was. Not that I cared. James talked to her quietly, then shouted out, "EMP, you dumbass! I didn't know they'd been lining the streets with them. They were ready," Nabo shot back. "I thought you were the big strong arm of the law. Shouldn't you pay attention to that shit? I got 2 eyes, James, and both of them are on the fuck-off fleet that's waiting to kill us all. And now all this shit's happening, and since you're here too, we know the score. Why send men when you can send money? Might be your lucky day. You're getting both. Your NEP pals are just as bad as the mercs. Hell, I even wore the Kill Me Last jacket." With this, James tore the rest of his yellow coat up. Nabo moaned some more about losing her Agrav, which I figured was supposed to be our ride to the shipyards and safety. The 4 guys in brown fatigues behind her were staring at me. I fastened and unfastened the buttons on my coat. A parking lot in the background was melted out of view. Then the remains of the geologically lethal noise that brought on snapped me out of my head. "The Corvids are taking advantage of this," Nabo was saying. "They've already started securing their districts, and they've got machines. Man, they've got machines. Don't care, you had a job. I got 2 jobs, 3 if you count fucking gun porn, and I'll do them all. Thing is, there's way too much money on killing you and that kid. Not that I'm gonna do it, just saying. Say something faster, asshole. I'm saying I know a way to get a mech, and we'll kill our way to the launch pad. NEP won't stop me, but if they do, they're traitors as long as we're with the kid. So we kill them all the same. How's that sound?" "Sounds like exactly what I paid you for, so don't act like you're doing me a favor." "How about some danger money, huh?" "Kid, you got money?" James asked me. I nodded. "He's worth more money than he's got in his pockets, bro," someone pointed out. I agreed, thinking that it might help me. I probably would have been less dumb if I really was raised by dogs. "Might be able to get both if we keep him alive," Nabo said. "Or get off-world. How about that?" Her crew weren't especially interested. Idiots. Well, they didn't kill me, and James said we should follow them out of the park. Across the main field, the trees were being knocked over by racing tanks, chased by some white cloud that was turning leaves on the branches into burning glue. I figured I should stick with the guys not killing me on sight, even though I wanted to sprint back to the palace. What was the big problem with staying there, I kept thinking. Same big problem with me staying anywhere in the city, as it turns out. Easy enough to see looking back on it. I was way too dumb to be who I was. And that damn fur coat too. Moving on. We proceeded on foot to a little corner of the park where the 10-meter concrete wall was torn open, the haze of burning oil and fragments of a fuel silo telling something of the reason why. The smell of oil covered that of the bodies. "That's them," Nabo commented. Nabo's crew jeered at the corpses playfully as we passed. Beyond the wall we were back in the streets, with people flitting in and out of apartments, dealing with fires and wounded neighbours. One building had a huge Turo Walker mech slouched into it, like an axe in a log. There were loads of yellowcoats eyeing it up, and climbing the wreckage, looking for ways to pull it apart. They were happy to see us going in the opposite direction. We heard the whole thing detonate about 2 blocks later, at which only I flinched and stumbled as the ground pulsed. A plate of oilcrete landed right by us, which finally got the others to acknowledge how fucked everything was. "Shit's fucked," the short and greasy one remarked, and that was all there was to say. We walked on, playing it cool, with yellow streaks all around us trying their luck at panicked fleeing. There was no direction that didn't sound like a festival of collapsing rubble, thundering guns, and last screams. We walked on. My crew's infectious calm allowed me to look around at my city falling with a sort of amusement. There were various problems that simply rebuilding the place would fix, I mused, so a night of debauched violence might just be the refreshment everyone needs. Amid my luxuriating in mad optimism, we were knocked to the ground by a pressure wave from our flank, accompanied by 3 seconds of pseudo-daylight under a white flame. "Orbital gun went up," James commented. "Not going to be many of those left after tonight, and there's going to be new ones in place by next week. Only there'll be nothing left in space to shoot, so they'll be pointing at you." He seemed to be referring to me, although he didn't seem the type for absurdities. But who was it? Corvid's got better things to do, Nabo said. Yep, it was probably someone like yourself, James said. What, a loyal woman of the great leader's eternal city? Yeah, a traitor, that's what I said. Whatever, it's a perfect night to retire. And the new employer offers better money. SNC has 100 worlds hedging cash on this shit. They'd pay you $1 million to piss in an NEP helmet and take a vid. I'll think about it. Don't tell me you ain't actually becoming a Brigador tonight. Brigador, why does it need a name? Something to put on your tombstone. You ain't a Brigador then? No, that's only what they call pilots. I'm fine sticking to my own body. You see, the reason why those skull-fucking vultures offered so much money to everyone fighting for them tonight is they don't expect half of them to ever make it to the bank to collect. Freedom fighting with all of the free and none of the freedom. Pretty sweet fucking deal those rich pricks got going. Me, I got a different plan. I take on the personal missions, like babysitting this dog child here, because I survive and file my invoice with impeccable punctuality. Yeah, I see that. Still saving up to get your face grafted back on. Still waiting for a donor I like the look of. I feel that. That's what we're going to be doing right now. New faces all round, is it? New body. New sexy body. Don't let the faceplate fool you. I ain't into metal. You will be in 5 minutes. I know exactly where those corvids are waiting. If we get there in one piece... You see that? There was another white light in the distance, this time only pushing a breeze our way. The orbital guns, the only thing stopping my city being conquered by the greed of humanity at large, just like the rest of the galaxy. The Solo Nobre concern, SNC, had been waiting to invade for a long time. This was why James had suddenly woken me up and got me out of the palace, without even going to see Father first. Father had his own people to get him out. I didn't know where to meet him, but slipping off world for now seemed the logical choice. If the SNC hadn't committed to orbit yet, we still had a chance. At least I knew what was happening now, and it was something we'd been preparing against for years. I'd say I never imagined it would be this bad, but I'd barely imagined it at all. What was I supposed to expect? I was wearing the damned yellow coat. That much I'd predicted, I guess. Nabo took us out of the endless shattering apartments and through the district checkpoint. No guards, some blood. James was happy with it. The district walls that crisscrossed the city were tall enough that I couldn't even see the top. Usually there would be lights along the rim, but the power was already intermittent when we left the palace, and now it was only local generators doing any work. We went through about 100 meters of tunnel packed with empty cars. Plenty of other people were coming and going in the dim glow of the emergency strip lights, giving yellow coats a greyish shine that would surely reek of filth if eyes could smell. Some seemed friendly, thinking my escorts were NEP. Maybe they still were, hard to say. I think the tunnel was a refuge of some kind, as there were doors all along the wall that people were banging on to get in. There was a scream when someone killed someone else with a long knife. We kept quiet and slipped through it all without trouble. I felt as light as air. A cocktail of fear and liberation was getting me sky high. You know, I'd always wanted to go see the city outside of the central district, and even doing so while a blade waited behind every coat we shuffled past was something of a payday for a kid like me. I didn't really get how much trouble I was in, or why they never let me leave Central in the first place. Well, we came out of that tunnel into the second virgin district James had dragged me to that day. It was an awe-inspiring shithole. Tents, piles of sludge, that was probably something even worse than what I thought it was, and in between, islands of bright neon lights, not one lumen dimmer than they'd been before the power grid went down. Great places for food, sex, smoke, and according to the graffiti being sprayed up before our eyes, for freedom. I was sold, and so was Nabo. This place was what the syndicalists were fighting for, moving in secret weapons or building their own in the back of every unrated bar. My old beat, Nabo said. I know exactly where to look. Some cop you were, really kept this place in line, James said. It was just for show. If we really cared, we'd have killed off half of them ages ago. So caring. Why don't you tear off those NEP patches before we get chopped up and served as some addict's last meal? You don't get it, James. This way, looks like we killed cops and took their clothes. Nabo gave some locals sitting in front of a drugstore a wave. They grinned and nodded. Tonight's really the night. James also grinned. Yep, they busted my Arlo though, so don't get me wrong, I hate these guys. Let's steal their shit and go to space. Rebel without a cause. You're a Brigador whether you like it or not, ma'am. I noticed people were staring at me. Don't know what they were so cocky about. They didn't even have their coats on. Nabo took us through a labyrinth of general degradation until we got close to the next black-brimmed district wall. On the roads we crossed there were guys in brown workman's suits blocking the roads with their cars. One car had a gun arm from a light mech welded to the roof like a turret. Everywhere there were similar suspicious shapes under mouldy sheets, with people milling about and swinging their heads all over the place. Looking for a sign, I guess. The district walls kept out most of the sound and most of the news, but people had figured out that tonight was the night for one thing or another, and a workman's pension fund is no use to a guy caught in a shithole like this with no bullets and no gang. I knew all about it, the infesting enemy of Solo Nobre. We would have rooted them out eventually. If they wanted to come out while the foreign invaders were here, that was only going to make things easier for me, I mused. I was thinking of home, of politics, of the city's future. As I keep saying, I was a real shit for brains. The true future for me was right through the door Nabo broke open into a big warehouse that used to be a rail yard. The whole area probably used to produce something. Actually, they still produced something. The ugliest, hugest, cheapest mechs on the planet. Nabo was ecstatic. No one's here, she said. I thought we'd have to bullshit our way in. Right, give them a look over, boys. Which one will it be? Said boys went wild. There were 4 hulks squatting upright and 2 more on their backs. All 6 were made from the massive bomber jets that had once flown over the planet battling the wild monsters. The wings had been folded up and wrapped around the cockpit to create a blanket of armor with armpit-like notches in which smuggled guns were ensconced. The origami mess this work created had been placed on a couple of freight lifters remodeled to function as legs, and there you have it, 5 stories high, 2 road lanes wide, and free for enterprising corrupt cops and refugees to test drive. This one's actually hooked up. Golden, one of the guys shouted from the furthest one. We went over and climbed the rope ladder hanging down from its ass to get in. I was second to last before James. Inside was a ring-shaped room in which there was enough room for one person who wasn't too wide around the waist to shimmy from the backside to the front, where a ladder to the cockpit had been fashioned out of door handles welded to a central pillar. One guy stayed behind to work the engine controls down there. The cockpit had 2 seats for 4 of us, and the final guy lifted himself onto what looked like a shelf above our seats that actually opened up to the outside through a rubber flap. There's nothing up here, the guy reported, and if this thing takes a hit in the back, it's gonna burst. Then stay there and tell me when I need to turn around, Nabo shouted. Holy shit, Captain. We're heading right at him, you'll be fine. Yeah, not like them Corvids would make a machine that's just some hobby hack death trap, right? James added. Fuck you, was the conclusive response, but he did stay out there. That's NEP training for you. Certainly we'd have won in the end. I had full faith that this crew knew how to pilot the beast we'd crawled into, ignoring how they questioned every transplanted button and dial. Wait, the waist clamp release is wired to a handbrake from a pompadour. This mechanical petting zoo was shook by a blast nearby. Everyone went quiet and listened. Boom, boom. That's a bishop firing, Nabo said. Corvids don't field that kind of artillery. That means the SMP paid someone to clear them a landing spot, James said. Shit timing. Should have expected it. I already sent up a message about this place. What? 6 battle mechs in the middle of a slum? Some shit was about to go down here. This intel's worth 50 million. Thanks. You dickhead, what if they kill us? What if they kill the guys running here right now to grab these mechs and get into the fight? It's them Shit, that's them now. Through the dome of the flight-rated glass in front of us, we watched the warehouse's main gates slide aside. A crowd was outside, with more dirty-looking Westrels coming off trucks and varlet tri-wheelers with custom paint jobs. They must think we're with them. Stay calm, Nabo reasoned. Long blue bolts of laser energy flashed up and shook the hull. If you can't kill them, you can't kill all the shit that's going to be in our way, so no point complaining, James lectured. Nebo and her co-pilot, the gunner, frantically pressed buttons. Me and James were stuffed into the gap between their seats and the wall behind us, where the parachutes would have been once upon a time. Hard shields are on. Shit, that's the biggest capacitor I ever saw. And there's an 88 ball mounted down here, the guy down the ladder shouted. Light them up, PV, Nebo roared with relish. Dig cannon. Nice touch, James nodded. Boom. The doors were filled with blood and smoke. And fully loaded, shooting no blanks. What a champ, James added, smiling at me. I didn't think it was funny at the time. Wait till we fire the big ones, Nebo said. She pulled that shoddy-looking handbrake lever, and the whole mech suddenly stood upright, bashing against the roof. The Rat King rises, she whooped. Predicting our question, she pointed at the words Rat King scrawled by hand on a strip of wood nailed to the dash. The king is dead, long live the king, James recited under his breath. In front of us, the syndicalists were getting into their vehicles or shouting into phones. A few more got past us under our legs as the Rat King stepped forward, shattering the roof apart, then blowing open the frame around the big doors. It's not bad, Nebo said. We lurched as one leg drew up, then slammed down in front of us, just barely stopping the whole mech toppling over. There was a splash of fire and shrapnel as cars in the street were pulverized below that foot. I was gripping the back of Nebo's seat like it was the edge of a cliff. They're getting the others online, Captain, the guy outside called. We were thrown to the side as the mech's torso rotated on its hips 180 degrees. SNC better pay me for this, Nebo quipped, before I was quaked to the point of vomiting by the man-sized main guns on either side of the cockpit, spraying burning hot ordnance all over the warehouse. The other custom mechs exploded with enough force to knock us away, but Nebo was quick on the legs and kept us upright. Fucking hell, James sighed. Told you, Corvid's got machines, Nebo said, seemingly taken in a fit of ecstasy. The so-called Dick Cannon shot at someone moving among the wreckage. The guy outside shouted something about mortar reports, and suddenly Nebo swung us around and marched us down the street. It's 2 districts over, James started saying, but Nebo insisted against being given directions. We were treated to a violent rise and fall with each step. All this shit and they couldn't make the legs the same length, Nebo complained. I told her it was harder if you didn't have a seat. She didn't sympathize. The dick fired again. Cars and bikes were buzzing around us, and Nebo kept swinging the torso to get a better look. They were all shooting things at us, but I couldn't feel anything. That was the hard shield. Our house had one. I think it was the only one on the planet like that, and they had to switch it off to let metal-laced men like James through the front door. Aside from that, I had no idea how it was keeping us alive amid the growing bombardment. The upside was that we weren't the only ones rampaging around the slums at 3 in the morning. We saw Agravs racing around and tanks firing at the roadblocks. One group turned its guns on us, then disappeared in a spray of burning metal from our rapid-fire cannons. The guy outside screamed something, and we swung around and blasted again. For a split second I saw a platoon of Mogs. They hadn't seen us yet, since people on foot were swarming them and throwing flaming bombs. The whole street was all shattered to bits, but our gunner was satisfied. Starboard Koenig's not firing right, check it, he said. He looked over his shoulder at me. I looked back and sat there unable to think of anything to say or any expression to make to communicate how insane it was that he thought I would understand him. The cable is coming out of the socket, he said with mechanical clarity, sounding off syllables between steps. He pointed at something on the wall beside me. There were loads of cables, loads of sockets. They were blurring together. Here, James said. With his left hand, he passed me his right hand, detached from the arm. Press it against the whole board. I complied, pushing the hand into the mess of wires. I couldn't feel if I was doing it hard or soft, but the gunner was happy enough with the volley that he blasted ahead of us to down the safety wall around a factory yard. He told me to hold it there, and I did. We went through the factory like it was a cloud, metal and oilcrete thrown away by our hard shield as our momentum carried us on step by step. On the other side, bullets were wasted on us from all directions, and long blue streaks of energy cannons made the hard shield flash visible for a moment as they collided with it, bathing everything in a sky blue light. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever vomited over. You know, I think they just really wanted to shoot at something, Nebo said. The torso span and the two big guns roared the streets clean of anything alive or functional. You're right, they're the real monsters, James said. Now let's go through the checkpoint before the NEP nukes the place by accident. There was a brief silence in which I felt utterly doomed. I decided to say something. I didn't think mechs like this were really used for fighting in real life. A pretty stupid thing to say, but Nebo was an eager teacher. Solo Nobre is a unique combat environment, she was quick to lecture. Whole planet really. All your standard import rockets burn out in 3 seconds, and the air ain't thick enough to fly anything less powerful than a damn... well, you'll see it. It kills dogs too, James threw in. Yeah, I heard something about that. Don't kill rats though. What's a rat? I asked. A real burning question, no kidding. You motherfucking... Nebo sighed. It seemed no one else wanted to tell me either. James threw me the look he'd used on me earlier, the one that said, "You're a dumbass who shouldn't let anyone know how good you've had it." He was good at saying that to me in all sorts of ways. So I shut up and endeavoured to tolerate the feeling that I was sliding into an abyss alone. Nebo stomped us down another row of old shops in a sea of tents, then up to the district wall. The checkpoint was in a deep recess, with guard towers flanking the road, all veiled in smoke and crumbling into the road before our eyes. Corvids already broke out, Nebo judged. Nice, drawing all the attention, James said. Let's run right through to our money shot. Let the comrades on the ground give their lives for our noble cause. We must be 10 seconds bloody behind them, the guy running the dick cannon remarked. Then we go through shooting, Nebo cheered. We lunged up and down with each bound forward with all the grace a plane with legs could offer. The metal on the district gate was still glowing red hot and peeling away to either side of us, like a delicate flower inviting us into its bounty. A shell hit the hard shield over the cockpit and left me blind and deaf for a few seconds. The internal lurching of the prol goulash I ate earlier was an instant reminder I was alive in the ringing darkness. Holy shit, James said. It was the first time he'd sounded impressed for real. I saw the whole district ablaze, buildings crumbling, and the red light of hot shells being flung in every direction and from every place. The dick cannon shot a car in front of us, and Nebo tilted down to spray a gang of yellow jackets in the street. Don't kill civilians, I cried, thinking only that I was myself disguised as one. They ain't civvies. Real yellow jackets are gone or dead by now, kid, James said. Corvid bombers. They've got ears. Must have been told we're with the NEP, the gunner said. Another half-truth in Solo Nobre City. Who could have known? We're going through. Shoot anything that looks at us, Nebo said. How are we doing back there? She called to the guy outside. He didn't reply at first because he was vomiting too. Then he said things were fine. And away we went. The district was, only an hour or so prior, a decent patchwork of painted oilcrete apartments with their own NEP guard stations, walled off from the nearby slums. Those walls were falling piece by prefabbed piece. Our hard shields were flashing in rapid pulses in response to attacks we couldn't see. Nebo had us arcing around to unload the main guns on whatever it was she saw, and I held that wire in place against the increasingly warm circuit board like it was a bandage against a wound. Had to ignore that the hand was twitching every time the gun fired. I realized I could have taken this project in for my school physics assessment. The effect of high voltage electric fields on independently operating human cybernetic devices. The effect being an undead writhing to accompany the rapid detonation of whole lines of mogs and tanks coming at us from every street. NEP and Corvid alike seemed to believe that we were their priority target. Nebo really did know what she was doing. She kept us walking steadily across the district towards the next gate, while turning only the Rat King's rotten torso to fend away these swelling armies. Fuel lines bursting our way! The guy outside screamed at us over the mountain of other noises, which was about half a second of warning before the street we were on went up in flames, the road ripping apart like hell was surfacing. The burning contents of a fuel pipeline melted the oilcrete around us and switched off our hard shield. Hey, see if that shit made us a shortcut, James said, calmly gesturing at me with one hand to keep the pressure on the other. Yeah, Nebo said. She was ruffled up. But after that gargantuan blast, the fighting around us was way quieter. Nebo took us through a section of interior wall the fuel line had split open, and then through a corridor of burning rubble that cut out most of the streets we were going to fight through. So that's a bit of luck. Once we got back to the route, it was in a place more intact, where the NEP banners hadn't even been torn down. We almost fell over when another orbital gun was destroyed nearby. I was used to it by now. In fact, I was starting to like having no control over my destiny. Getting blown in every direction while crammed in between plates of recycled metal has a way of convincing you things are actually okay. So yeah, I was losing it. Hey, good news for me, we started getting blasted again the moment we hit unspoiled tarmac. Sleek A-gravs shot past us and laced our flank with bullets. The shields didn't stop them. Nebo didn't miss a beat, jolting us to shoot at those things as they escaped. "That's spacer shit," James said. "Yeah, they want their war long and expensive. That's why this place is so peachy." I didn't get it at the time, but the short version is that these spacers, the good ones who didn't want to conquer my planet, supplied us with stuff, including most of the weapons. And they were here with their own weapons to make sure that all of the machines of war they'd lined the slums with were being used in a responsible and sustainable manner. There were more in the street. Things looking like race cars that fired long beams of light all over us. Nebo was cursing and shooting back. We were winning every time. Nebo kept cursing louder though. We got up to the gate. It was dark, all power held to ransom elsewhere. For a second I saw the lights of a more prosperous district through the straight tunnel. They disappeared behind the orange and white striped barricades rising up to seal the safe areas off. The panic walls. That was Father's greatest achievement, I was often told. Finally I saw them working, from the wrong side. "Bad timing. They got backup power over there, must be," James said. "We can break through, but how many tanks do you think will be pointing at that checkpoint?" Nebo said. "We can look for a station and siphon some hard shield energy from a train car, or better yet, find a wreck with its battery still intact," the gunner suggested. He seemed like a friendly guy. Then the panic wall at the other end of the tunnel emitted a painful violet light. It faded to reveal the wall gone, and a really big A-grav coming right at us, trailing smoke. "Someone got tired of their shit," James laughed. "Alright, maybe we're clear on the other side too. Give it a shot." Nebo pushed the controls forward and we moved for the tunnel. Then James lunged forward and hit Nebo on the head with his stump arm. "Back, back, back!" he ordered. Nebo didn't get it for a second, and that was long enough for us to be doomed. James had already seen it. The 4 curious bulbs sticking out of the side of that A-grav. It was about to reach us, too fast for us to turn around. The guns fired out, but the A-grav flicked side to side to stay out of our sights. It didn't shoot back. It just whizzed past and then fled into the smoky night behind us. "Is he gone?" Nebo called to the guy outside. No response. This time he really was dead. "Fuck," James said. He wasn't worried about that guy, don't misunderstand. "Was that a black hand?" Nebo asked him coldly. He nodded. Immediately Nebo set the legs to a crouch. "Right, everyone out." The whole machine croaked like it was out in the midday sun. Something was fizzling. It was the circuit board next to my head. The fine details were melting away, like the world was losing its resolution. But my eyes were fine. James took his hand back and dragged me down to the exit. No one wanted to get the dead guy up top. At least it was quieter now. I was pushed over to the dark shadows beneath the tunnel mouth, leaving the Rat King squatting in the road. I didn't even think about asking why we'd got out, being pretty much drunk on confusion and probably half concussed to boot. But I saw the problem plain as can be. The mech's parts started dropping out of place, then it all crumbled as if it had been turned to paper. In fact, that's not far off what a so-called Black Hand machine does. Works much faster on a planet than it does in space. That spacer ship had knocked us out by brushing gently past our shoulders. That's why everyone wanted to buy weapons from them, I suppose. "Maybe lasted longer than the others," the dig cannon guy said wistfully. He seemed genuinely sad at one thing or another. Everyone else was still raring to go, because people who aren't like that in these situations probably already died before they got this far. That'll do then. Sorry for your loss and shit. You're off the hook, Pilar, James said to Nabo. Money, Nebo said robotically. Coming your way. Go survive somewhere and check in the morning. I'll finish the delivery on foot. Since we got that yellow jacket and all, should be easy. With the last word, he turned and directed his malice at me, uncalled for. Right. Phew. Quickly then, Nebo said to the others, with eyes that looked like they were holding back an explosion. The Rat King was on fire, burning with a black flame. Just another thing I saw for the first time that night. The 2-second funeral for all lost souls was over, and James had me walking briskly down the pedestrian strip at the side of the district tunnel. Seeing the panic wall at the other end was gone, just gone, we could see trees and carefully kept hedge walls lined with good lights. People were gathered there in front of a line of NEP vehicles, keeping them out. Spacer flyers were humming around behind us, but they didn't come into the tunnel. The fighting back there was picking up again. A few more people were creeping from buildings to follow behind us. Once we crossed the threshold where the panic wall had been, I pulled in a long breath of fresh air. Hardly any smoke, and the sweet touch of the hedges mixed in. Pretty much how it was at home. For a moment, my heart reset, and I felt the weight of my body return. Still, I was just a fish on James's line. He took me along the edge of the moaning crowd towards the front. I didn't understand why we couldn't go past the line of tanks ahead, and neither did the crowd. The reason was that the guys saying no had Mogs, mechs, a wall of tanks, and a Citadel command column a ways back with its lights pointing at us. Practically a building with wheels and guns attached. Again, just like we had at home. If we tell them who I am, they'll let us in, I said to James meekly. Or kill you on the spot. Can't tell anything right now, he said. They're on our side, I said, being about as dumb could be, of course. No sides here. Actually, there's up and down, those are your sides. Planet and space. SNC and whoever isn't them. And remember, every 3 tanks you see, 1 is on the SNC payroll. Guarantee you that. Probably the one that doesn't give a shit about driving through a building. Or, you know, firing a fucking Gatling into a crowd of their precious citizens. I heard SNC pays you extra for that shit. So's chaos makes their job easier. Guess Viscera cleanup's easier than telling them why the great leader has to go to some farm outside the city forever now. Is that what that woman is like? Nabo, she was on my payroll, and if I'm lucky, she ain't ever gonna cash that check. Or she'll be on my ass for danger money and surgery on some spacer barge that charges 10 times more than what I'll get for delivering your graceful self out of here. When one party brings money to the battlefield, everyone else has got to do the same or fall in line. Nothing easier than understanding that. So, what do we do? Don't get shot when the shooting starts. When's that? Soon as someone gets bored. We're surrounded by NEPs, Corvids, SNC goons, spacer informants, and hell, maybe 1 or 2 innocent people. Once we stop pretending what's happening tonight is under anyone's control but fucking mine. There was a massive explosion in the very middle of the roadblock. Suicide bomb. Everything started shooting, and James had me flying into the depths of the nearest hedge. It was like being razored all over. These hedges were tough enough for Nova Solo after all. At the back of each hedge was a steel wall holding it all up, and holding us out of respectable people's gardens. I had my face against that steel for a few seconds, while James pried open a join between panels. Then I was through. We were in a residential neighbourhood with tall white houses, flat green lawns, and nothing out of place except the sound of a massacre 10 meters behind us. Somehow James let out a relieved sigh. Right, we're on my backup plan track from here. This is the easy part, kid. Let's go. We took off through the streets. People were looking out of their windows at us. I decided to slip open my yellow jacket so they could see my furs, to put them at ease. James would speed up between each house and slow down when close to the walls, looking over them with unabashedly thieving intent. We went 20 houses down the road, curled around into an identical row, and walked right past the road gate with the hedge wall. Residents were arguing that the panic walls should be raised. The soldiers there pointed at me and said that everyone should be wearing yellow coats outside. We had good men here and there. The best were in places like this, I suppose. I still don't know if James actually knew where we were going. Eventually though, he let out a yap and pulled me up the driveway of one of the houses. There was a wide red garage docked beside it. We almost reached it, then a side door burst open in tandem with James's spring-loaded arm ramming me to the ground. "It's a good night," James recited quickly. "For a memory," the fat guy in the door said. He lowered his shotgun from shoulder to hip, keeping the business end going our way. "Password ain't enough tonight," he added. "I've got the pictogram. I'll get it out slow. Don't worry about the kid, here's my package," James said. From his feet, I watched him take out a rectangular sheet of metal from his pocket, the size of a playing card. The fat guy stepped closer to look at it. His eyes flashed blue. Then he stepped back. As James pocketed the sheet, I saw it had a symbol with a skull and a sword that I had seen before, but couldn't place it there and then. I'd see it again soon enough, though. "It's all paid for?" the guy asked. "Doesn't look like much, but this one's a lifelong payout for anyone who touches it, so you got nothing to worry about, except the stray bishop shells. The panic wall at the dock is up, you know." "What? I thought this place wasn't locked down yet." "Dock is. Lots of NEP there. Lots and lots. That gonna matter?" "No, but the wall does." "Right, let's try this." James helped me onto my feet forcefully, then handed a few strips of platinum to the guy. All right, blow it up for all I care," the guy said. He lowered his gun and went back inside for a moment. Then he returned and showed James a map of the district covered in handwriting. James went dead still for a moment and stared at it, as if it had turned him to stone. "Done?" the guy asked, but James was turning to go before the question mark left the guy's tongue. "Have a nice life," James said, driving me forward towards the garage. The door was already opening. There was something that looked like a boat inside, an A-grav with the power off. James got it running and put me inside. When the doors sealed, it was completely quiet, only humming, and I felt like everything was over. "One stop to make, touch those wires together when I say so," James said. Sure enough, there were 2 wires poking through holes drilled in the dash. I said I'd do it. "You're a natural," he said. I agreed. We hovered down the drive and span out onto the road fast and smooth, rising to the A-Grav's cruising height about 3 meters up. We went right over the top of the group moaning at the gates. Unbelievably, no one shot at us. "Diplomatic ID. We're good. Told you this is the easy part. Just be glad I'm using this on you. Was gonna be just me," James said. "Thanks. I appreciate everything you've done. And before, too. You're a good guard," I said, as professionally as I could muster. "I'm crooked as they come, kid. That's what's keeping you alive right now. Money. But yeah, by your standards, I'm a good guard, alright. Model employee. Now get ready to touch those wires. We'll have 5 seconds to be gone before the Mogs bust us." What this turned out to mean was that when James parked us up against a flashy upmarket store, and the front of the A-Grav opened up like a mouth, the wires would trigger the very same audio pulse weapon I'd seen eviscerating apartments earlier. I didn't realize it until the deed was done. In an awesome moment, the 4-story building was blown away, then blown back towards us when a bank of substations behind it exploded violently, our real target. We darted away before the rubble landed, heading into the darkness falling over the block as the streetlights suffocated. James could still see, I suppose, as he took us this way and that, lowering the cruise height to sink underneath a railway platform, then turning on the vehicle's own lights and slowing down to calmly emerge onto a main road. All of that was fuzzy blurs and stomachache to me. "Were there people in there?" I asked as soon as the question got through to my mouth. James tutted, looked at me, then back to the road. "Yeah, I bet. Turns out it was us or them." "Why?" "Why?" James scoffed. After another turn, below a yellow sign reading Space Tug Port, he almost whispered, "Because I fucking said so." I kept quiet. There were loads of cars driving around this area and tanks taking up the middle lanes. Traffic didn't matter to A-Gravs, and whatever this diplomatic ID was, it got blind eyes turning from all the NEP guarding this end of the district. There were bases for military units, orbital guns, and most importantly, an oil-crate park of launch pads for low-orbit craft. One, and only one, was still on its pad. Half the cars we passed were heading right there, and sure enough there was another wall of armor and weapons set up to keep everyone away. James slowed us down and hovered right over the front of the newest moaning crowd we'd thrown ourselves into. The soldiers came forwards and cleared a spot for us to land. This was more like it. I got out before James did, which annoyed him. Immediately I was accosted by the soldiers, but my furs at least gave them some second thoughts. James flashed them some papers and said that he was from the palace. They didn't seem convinced, but then he pointed at me. "Don't you recognize him? Yeah, that's who you think it is. Got shit on his face or whatever, since getting here was actual work, so do your jobs and let us the fuck through." Being rude to people who can kill you whenever they want paid off in that way only James could manage. The soldiers shone lights on me, said a few things, then stiffened up and let us through, keeping their distance. Everyone nearby was going insane at the sight of it, so that gave the hotheads something to beat instead. I imagined the effect of that audio pulse on a crowd of people. They'd be turned to flecks and droplets in an instant. It felt like the best way to do something so bad. That should be the Novo Solo creed. At the base of the bright yellow tugship there was a ramp into its cargo hold. Loads of soldiers were there and guys in gel suits, spacers. Both the category of people that about 10 minutes back had been killing people all around me. Now they chatted relatively happily, with only the occasional skeptical glance directed at me. Word must be going around. There was an officer standing beside two soldiers who were tied up and kneeling. "Is there one man in this unit who isn't in bed with the SNC?" the officer asked. "I thought you didn't mind," was the response from one of the condemned. "You let them put up those posters in the changing room, didn't you?" "They had posters in the fucking changing room? How the fuck did they— How the actual fuck— Is everyone a fucking traitor?" the officer exploded, going on in the same vein long after we passed by. James was taking me to see the general standing by one of the tug's extendable feet. I recognized him, one of Father's trusted men. It really began to feel like it was over. "And who— Oh, it's you," the general said, trying to keep a straight face when he recognized me. James stepped right in and regained the lead. "That's right, Deputy Palace Commissar reporting for duty, General. Emergency protocols are active. I'll keep you, this city, alive. There will be SNC agents on this ship. You want me between them and you, trust me." The general only took his eyes off me at the final words. He looked at James, metal features from top to bottom. "Didn't you— You were guarding the Great Leader's bedroom last night. That's a distinctive faceplate." "Yep, doing my job. I still am. So I need to know that you know you can trust me. We gotta stick together. To honor the Great Leader." "Right. Of course." He finally shook James's hand. "Motherfucker, I still have pain receptors in this thing, you know?" James laughed with a ring of his wrist. The general smirked, then pointed that ugly mouth at me. I spied the glimmer of drool. "I'll take him aside, let him know what's happening," James said with a euphemistic nod. "I already know," I said reflexively. "You don't. Give me a few seconds, sir." James took me back towards the cordon. I thought he was going to throw me to the rats. Instead, he steered me into an enclave of dumped cargo and whispered to me, "Take a look at all the shit in the way from here to the on-ramp and plot a route. In 90 seconds, that old man will drop dead." He flashed his open palm. There was a black ring that seemed blurry, and my eyes burned after looking at it for only a moment. "People are going to go over and check him out once he hits the deck. You can get into the ship then. Strap in, and if anyone asked, tell him who you really are." "You didn't have to kill him, he was going to help us." "You being alive wasn't part of his plan tonight, but it's part of mine. And as I said, it's all up to fucking me now. Do what I said, and we both win. Have a good life." "I'll just follow you," I said, almost grabbing James as he turned away. "Nope. All those explosions and shit. That's my day job, and this is gonna be a hell of a day. Just tell him James sent you when you get captured." "What?" "You'll see. You'll be fine. I gotta go." James walked off and had a quick word with the cordon guards, then got let out into the crowd. There were fires all over the city, seemed like, and the sounds of fighting were picking up from somewhere within the district. I hoped my dad would be alright. Should have been more worried about myself. I took a look at the path to the ship. There was plenty of discarded junk someone had thrown out of the hold at the last minute. The general was chatting to a couple of spacer women. About 10 seconds later, they were recoiling from the vomit spewing them up and down. He reeled and moaned helplessly. I knew what to do. It was easy. I slipped forwards through the mess while the soldiers converged on the gurgling sack they'd sworn to die for. It was a drop in the pool compared to all the chaos around us. Still, it got me to the ramp without interference. I threw away my safety coat and went up. Someone was there looking out at the noise. They stiffened when they saw my furs. "What's happening, my lord?" the guy said with nervous glances back and forth. "The enemy is here. We're taking off," I said in a deep voice. I walked a few steps away before I let myself breathe. The guy pestered me about whether I had luggage, and I repeated my order. He went away, then a load more of the spacers came in, along with some soldiers. They all bothered me as I sat stoically on the hood of a richly polished car no one had dared to throw out yet. I took out a strip of platinum stamps and broke off a segment for all of them as an advance payment. Coat, car, cash, that got the questions to go away. Some of them probably didn't have it in them to pretend they didn't know who I was, too. Empty as my stomach was by then, I felt like I was going to vomit just as much as the general. He was dead, the soldiers were saying. There was an agreement that we needed to lift off, but people were arguing about whether we could really escape. The planetary blockade wasn't going anywhere. That brought them back to me. They asked if I had secured a route or pulled strings in the palace. I lied to them in any way that seemed fit, feeling colder and colder as it dawned on me that we really were likely to get shot if we tried to leave without permission. Maybe I should try and cut a deal with the SNC, I thought. I asked to be taken to the bridge, and the spacers were happy to have me there. "Let's get away from the rabble," one older lady said to me with a blue-lipped smile. I smiled back, and we left said rabble at the bottom of a long ladder. The cargo bay doors closed while we were climbing. The ladder was too long, so I had to stop midway. The world outside had gone quiet. Now it was just the reverberation of distant explosions and crashes resonating against the hull, which was almost calming. The lady was calling for me to catch up, but my arms were pretty numb. They shook steadily. I stared at them for a while, almost unable to believe they were my arms at all. Then I kept climbing, because I remembered the people trapped below probably wanted me dead. I ended up in the cockpit. Everything was sideways, facing the sky. I was invited to sit down, i.e. lie down, and strap into the seat behind the pilot. The pilot's head did a 180 to scan me up and down, then snapped back to front and center. His face was completely blue. I wondered where James was now. 6 others sat down around me, and the lady from before said, "Will you need to call ahead?" I panicked and said yes. A few seconds later, a voice warned us all that if we take off, we die. Everyone glanced at me. "You should be expecting me," I said as clearly as I could. "My, Brigador was lost, but he wanted to deliver me." The others didn't seem happy with this vague imploring, and there was no reply at first. "Don't you have the seal, the sigil?" one of the spacers practically spat. That thing James used, I guess he meant. I shook my head, and an argument broke out around me. "Right, listen up," a different voice from above said. Everyone listened. "I'm not sure what missions you're all on, but consider this maximum priority. We've got most of the guns in your sector down, and we'll have the rest in a few minutes. All of your contracts are hereby altered, and it's simple. Get that boy to the Harridan. Cargo hooks can take your tug. Docking will be easy enough." "I can land in the bay myself," the pilot interjected, but the voice ploughed on. "Completion of this mission will earn you all planned payments and the chance for reassignment to new missions that make use of this asset. Please comply. Asset." Everyone looked at me again. The machines around me were buzzing calmly. I felt a spark in me flaring up at the thought of that voice's irreverence. It was different to James's brazen, brutish discourtesy. I was afraid of it. "I approve," was the best I could muster. That got things going. There was quaking from the engines and much technical talk. An SNC officer called us and talked us through the regulations to be followed aboard their ship. The spacers were extremely rude to them, which I enjoyed. Another called after a minute and told us to take off. Not 1 second later, I was pressed into the chair and made to listen to the spacers deliver a barrage of insults to the planet. That was their tradition. For all their hatred, they seemed to admit that Solo Nobre was the best part. So there. The tug's windows in front of me were white for most of the ascent, fading to reveal the black of space as things settled down 2 minutes later. The spacers kept scanning me with shimmering machine-infused eyes, and the pilot gave me another horrifying look over with his spry neck. "We can change the appearance, make it more, you know," one said. "I'll do whatever they pay for," another said. "I willingly wager the SNC are too foolhardy to have even thought of it," the pilot buzzed. "So we had best inform them that we can make this boy look much more like a true great leader, or what have you, and that of course our price and quality are the most finely balanced option they have to hand." "Don't you worry about it," that lady said to me, placing a gelatinous glove on my arm. I was still glued to the seat by the force of acceleration. I did worry about it all the way up to space. My first time there in years, since the SNC had come. And now I was tumbling gracefully into their arms, my city burning and collapsing so far below me that one had to concentrate to see the gleaming district lights flickering out. I stared at it, now positioned ahead of me as we reversed into the cargo bay of the SNCS Harridan, a prison ship. The weightlessness felt familiar and even welcome. The cuffs, the guns, and the grinning desperados all around, striped by shadow in the dim light. I ignored it all quite happily. Then my furs were taken off me by a well-mannered knave whose professional spiel left no room for negotiation. The spacers were taking my picture in a friendly-seeming way. I floated there for a while, then spoke up when I realized they weren't going to give my furs back. In answer, I got a hand on my shoulder and a no-nonsense push. I started swinging down the corridor via handles all over the walls, the jabbing hands following to menace a good pace out of me. I asked what was happening, or where I was going, or any number of questions like that, but all I got was what I could see with my own eyes. SNC troops were taking me to a cell. It was, all told, a nice cell. They had prepared fine dining Solo Nobre spaghetti for me, and with all that effort I supposed it would have been a waste to poison me now, so I took it all in like the dog from Vega that raised me. No point in those stories here, that much was obvious. A guard came and told me to go to sleep. They didn't stick around to check if I did, so no guilt for passing the offer up. I strapped myself in at the empty desk in that small room with my hands clasped together. I was incredulous at how utterly silent it was in there. Every sound I had heard in the city was still faintly echoing in my ears, and every jolt of the Rat King still pulsing in my bones. When was it I figured that James was selling me to the enemy? I think I suspected it from the beginning. I think I knew that my father was dead the moment James forced the lock on my bedroom door. I knew that I owed James my life, whatever that life was worth now. The SNC owed James just as much more, as it would turn out. I was high above that smoky morning after in Solo Nobre. The city had fallen, and those who it fell upon gleamed defiant yellow as the Mogs moved the wreckage into the scrap trucks. People were being told to get somewhere with a working radio or TV, and to otherwise stay out of the way. Troops were everywhere, spacers, syndicalists, NEP holdouts, but the war was already over. The former contenders all had their eyes on the sky, where 10,000 ships were coming down in long red trails. Some smiled, some cried, and some asked what became of their great leader. For the answer, check a working radio or TV, midday sharp. Subtitles in all major languages will be available. I had 2 spacers doing my makeup, a lot of it. My fur coat was back, washed. Great leaders didn't need to lead great if they look great, a cushion-faced crony quipped. I let them get away with it. I had already planned everything out in my cell, so I was calm and polite when the orders came, the scripts, and the barely spoken deal that I was now the SNC's planetary puppet. Good. They picked exactly the guy to blow the job out of the water. I would look my people in the eye, and as I spouted all the lies about our new liberated city, I would think about James and everyone else down there, and I would remind everyone that in Solo Nobre, the innocent have nothing to fear, and the guilty nothing to lose. Those lines of my father's that started it all. Even if the SNC kills me there and then, it will be too late. I'm shaking. The door is opening. I am the great leader, I'm thinking. I don't recognize the guys floating outside. They're too dirty for a space crew, and too covered in blood to be welcome guests. Change of plans, the Ripley one says. I don't know whether to dance for joy or kill myself. Brigadors. Day 2 of the war begins.